Unfortunately, fishing has become extremely expensive, and with these ever rising gas prices, it just seems that every time I go out there on the water, I am just shoveling out money to do so. And today I want to give you 7 tips that will help you to save money and not completely break the bank while going out and going fishing. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com. One of the best ways to save money is actually to shop when there are deals and sales on your favorite fishing lures. And right now at Sportsman's Outfitters, there is a very big Memorial Day sale going on for the next few days where you can save a lot of money on some of your favorite lures. Not only that, but if you are on the market for a rod, right now, if you buy an Arc Lancer Pro Series rod, you can get the second rod for just $19. That's right, a $100 rod for just 19 bucks. So if you guys are interested in that, click the link down below in the description and you're greatly gonna help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel. Now, if you are an avid tournament angler like myself, you are really probably feeling these rising gas prices. I mean, it costs $200 to fill up a boat right now. It costs $100 to fill up a truck. But even if you're not a tournament angler, even if you just like to go out and go fishing, it's very costly to do so. You know, lures are expensive, fishing line is expensive, rod and reels are expensive. All that stuff is expensive no matter what level of fishing you're on. So I just wanted to make a video that would help us save money while still being able to go out there and do what we all love. Now, the first money saving tip really revolves around simplifying your color selection. When I first started fishing, one of the first lures that I caught them on, probably like you, was a Cinco, right? And I remember catching them on a green pumpkin Cinco, and right after that, this is probably when I was like 12 years old, I wanted to go out and buy every color Cinco that I could because I thought that I would find that one color that nobody else was throwing, that one color that was gonna be a magical color. And guess what? Now I have been fishing a Cinco for probably about 20 years. And with that being said, there's probably 2 colors that I catch 90% of the bass with a Cinco. For me, I love green pumpkin blue and I love black and blue. And those are the 2 colors that I catch a ton of fish on. Now, depending on where you live in the country, your 2 or 3 colors that you like may be different, but they're probably the ones that you go to more times than not. So instead of going out there and spending all this money on just extra colors of different lures that we love, just stick with the ones that you are super confident in and the ones that always work for you. And that's really gonna help you save a ton of money. And not only does this apply to soft plastics, but it also applies to your hard plastic baits as well. I know for me, like I love a Rapala DT6. It's a phenomenal lure, but it seems like every year they come out with a new color that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's gonna be the color. That's gonna be the one. But at the end of the day, I always end up catching them off pretty much the same shad pattern, the same crawfish pattern, and the same chartreuse blueback color that I always use. So simplifying your lure colors is really going to help you to save a lot of money. Now, the second money saving tip really comes down to your rod and reel selection, because this is one of the biggest expenses that we have as a fisherman. And it's very easy for us to see a professional angler who might have 10 or 15 or 20 rods on the front deck of their boat and just want to have that same thing. And me, myself, it is very nice to be able to have a designated rod for a designated lure, but it is not necessary. I actually did a full-length video on this exact subject, and in that video I really talked about how you can basically fish 95% of the techniques that we talk about in fishing with 3 different rod and reel combos. Now, those 3 rods include 2 bait cast rod and reel combos and 1 spinning rod. And for me, if you're fishing any single hooked lure like a jig, a Texas rig, a spinner bait, a buzz bait, you could fish that all on a 7-foot 3-inch medium heavy power rod that is a fast action. That's one rod. Anything that has treble hooks, I'm gonna go with a 7-foot 2-inch medium power rod that is a moderate action, that has more of a parabolic bend. That's gonna be great for treble hooks. Now, any of my finesse techniques, Ned rigs, Nico rigs, wacky rigs, drop shots, I'm gonna do that with a 7-foot, 7'1" medium power rod. That's gonna be perfect for all those spinning rod applications. And sure, it would absolutely be nice to have designated rods for designated lures, but those 3-rod and reel combos alone are gonna cover you for most of your fishing. Now, the third money-saving tip comes down to preventing rust on all of your tackle. You know, this is something that guys who fish in saltwater really have to deal with, but even if you fish in freshwater, this is something that we deal with a lot. And for me, living in Ohio, there were so many years as I was growing up that I would put my tackle boxes away for the year in November or December, and in March and April when I would pick them back up, I would have a ton of rust in those boxes. And it really led to me just throwing a ton of lures away and really just wasting a lot of money. Now, there are several things that you can do to prevent rust, but a couple things that are really easy for all fishermen to do is, one, just make sure your lures are dry before you put them into a box. Rust is created when you have water that is sitting on your lures for an extended period of time. So if you put a lure that is wet back into a box and close that box, that's what's gonna lead to a lot of rust. So letting lures sit out and dry, especially lures like topwaters that have feathered treble hooks on them, letting those dry completely before putting them away is huge when it comes to preventing rust. Now, another thing that you can do is buy boxes like Flambeau boxes that have rust inhibitors. Rust inhibitors. I think that's the word. These type of boxes were actually made to prevent rust in all of your lures. And yes, they're typically a little bit more expensive on the front end, but I started using these type of boxes a long time ago, and it really helps me to not have to throw a ton of lures away every single year when I pull those boxes out in the spring. And if you don't want to buy boxes, they also sell little rust inhibitors that you can throw into your current boxes that will also help to prevent that rust. The fourth way to actually save money in fishing is actually by using more braided line. Now, sometimes braid can be a little bit more expensive up front, but these days, most of the fluorocarbon lines are just as expensive as a good braided line. Now, unless I am flipping and pitching grass or frogging, I typically use some sort of fluorocarbon leader still, but I'm going to use a braided line for my main line. Not every technique out there I'm gonna recommend that you use braided line with, but there are several techniques that I now use a braid to a fluorocarbon leader all the time with. For instance, topwaters. Anytime I'm fishing a topwater bait, I use a braid to fluorocarbon leader. Every time I use a spinning rod, braid to fluorocarbon leader. And here recently, I've actually started to flip and pitch a little bit more with a braid to fluorocarbon leader, because I used to spool up my flipping and pitching rod, 5, 6, 7 times a year with 20-pound fluorocarbon. And that got to be extremely expensive. And I know that with my topwater and spinning rods, I've used the exact same braid on those lines for 2 seasons, and I just keep attaching new fluorocarbon leaders, and it's still good to go. So I highly suggest that anytime you can do a braid or a braid to fluorocarbon leader, do that, because you will not spend as much money on fluorocarbon line. Now, like I said, there are a lot of techniques that I don't like to use braid with, and I'm going to use just straight fluorocarbon. And this actually brings me to tip number 5, which is use backing on those reels with fluorocarbon. Most of the bait casting rod and reels that I use are going to hold 100, 150 yards of line. But when I'm out there fishing, I'm really only going to be using probably 30, 40, 50 yards of line when I am out there casting. Now, you could just keep cutting that line further and further back into the spool and just keep using it, but that line is going to start getting old. It's going to start being really kinky. And if you only have half of your spool loaded up with fluorocarbon line, you're going to lose out a lot on the gear ratio. And sometimes gear ratio is extremely important when you're out there fishing. So something that I like to do is I'm going to use a really cheap monofilament line. I'm going to load about 50 or 60 yards onto that reel, and then I'm going to attach my fluorocarbon, and I'm going to reel on about another 50 or 60 yards. So if you do that, you're gonna be able to keep a spool that is really full, which is going to help you to be able to cast a lot further. It's also gonna keep that line from being just so kinky, and you're not going to lose out on your gear ratio. Now, the 6th money-saving tip is buy in bulk. Now, not every single lure manufacturer actually sells their items in bulk, but I think that more and more you are seeing this among certain brands. For example, I know at Sportsman's Outfitters, you can buy a 30-pound pack of Yum Dingers opposed to a 10 pack. They also sell fluke style baits and lizards and big worms all at bulk. And so anytime you can buy your favorite colors like we talked about earlier in bulk, that is also going to help you save money. Now the seventh and final money saving tip is when you can, make your own lures. You know, there are a lot of different ways that you can make jig heads and even soft plastic these days. And I actually just made a video all about how I go about making a Ned rig. And so I'm gonna leave a link for that video right here. If you guys wanna check that one out next, you're gonna see my process for making a Ned rig. Also, don't forget to check out those memorial sale deals. Comment below, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.